Welcome to the campus of North Idaho College and today's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Today we have three representatives from the Self-Help for the Hard of Hearing People, Incorporated. I would like to introduce to you, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Charles Neiman, who is an audio specialist, and second is Mr. John Senna, who is in the Panhandle chapter of the national organization, and our third guest is Mr. Rocky Stone, who is the national president of the Self-Help for the Hard of Hearing People, Incorporated. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm happy also to welcome to the panel to question our guest today. First of all, regular panelist Mary Lou Reed. Second is David Coyne in the Department of Sociology at North Idaho College, and Muriel Kirkpatrick from the Department of Psychology at North Idaho College. We will invite Mary Lou Reed to commence the questioning.
Thank you, Tony. Rocky, how did you get into organizing SH? And tell us again, SH is Self-Help for the Hard of Hearing, right?
It's Self-Help for Hard of Hearing People. And that's a very important point because we are first and foremost people. All we have lost is our hearing. We have not lost our humanness. So we stress the point that we're not inanimate objects. We're people.
And why did you organize this organization?
Well, having had the problem for 35 years and having retired from a pressure cooker called CIA, I decided that I would get into something that I knew quite a bit about. And the first thing I learned about hearing loss was that I didn't know anything about that either. And I had to begin to study the subject because it's a very complicated subject. And it took me about 2 years to begin to feel comfortable with the subject in a way that I could discuss it without too much research. And I learned a great deal, which led to new points of view regarding the population of hearing-impaired people. The emphasis had always been on deaf people. We're trying to shed some light on what we call hard-of-hearing people.
So you decided to put together an organization in order to be more effective in educating, and what other reasons?
Well, definitely in educating, because deaf people have community resources, they have support structures, they have existing channels of dissemination which are inadequate, but nevertheless they have some. Hard of hearing people, usually people who lose their hearing as adults, don't admit that they've lost their hearing. They certainly don't band together in groups. They have no channels of dissemination. They don't know the nature, the cause, the complications of their problem. The family doesn't know it, the community doesn't know it, and we're shedding new light on all of those subjects in a way which is startling and very rewarding because it's changing lives.
One additional quick question about the name. Why self-help?
Because I don't believe that you can really do much for anyone else until they have made the basic decision that they want to help themselves.
Thank you.
David Coyne.
In an article this morning, Mr. Stone, there was a statement, you gave a quote in the Spokesman Review, and it said that the function of self-help for hard-of-hearing people was to educate people about hearing deficiencies and the dangers of noise pollution. And I'm curious as to what types of noise pollution you're referring to. What does it encompass?
Well, we live in a world which is inundated by noise. Many people think that the fact that they listen to, if you're a young person, you listen to loud music for a sustained period of time, that puts you at risk. The older person certainly believes that. The young person has not yet reached that conclusion. The fact is that household implements, street traffic, all kinds of things, airplane noise, factory noise, all kinds of things in our society put us at risk. And we have about 28% of our workforce who have the potential of losing their hearing by virtue of their work environment. There has been a great deal of work done on conservation, and there are laws in existence which mandate hearing conservation, and the state of Idaho, I think, will be hearing more about those. The state of Washington also already has some pretty good conservation policies. But the point is that we have to learn what kind of noise at what levels may possibly damage our hearing. And the reason it's so important is that when you lose your hearing by noise, it's usually a nerve impairment which is irreversible. There is no medical or surgical solution for that type of impairment. And the price that you pay for that is an enormous price that you don't see. And people like me are beginning to try to visualize that price for you so you can make a choice.
Are you working through, say, government agencies to establish legislation to fight noise pollution, say, at the factory? Like, would you go through, say, OSHA, as an example, to help you with this?
No, as a new organization having only 4 full-time people who are unpaid, plus sporadic volunteers, we don't have the capability for that yet. What we do have is the kind of vision and innovative approach to the problem which will allow us, for example, in June, to launch a national campaign to conserve the hearing of our young people by putting into the cafeterias of all schools a noise regulator, which is a traffic light pattern hooked up to a sound meter, which explained very quickly, when the noise level gets to be a dangerous level, the red light goes on, and the kids are supposed to be quiet. And this is sort of something which is fun, they can understand it. And by getting that into their awareness that they really are risking something, we hope to begin dialogue between them rather than us and them on the subject. We hope that they will begin to research the problem, that they will begin to learn and understand what that risk really is, because they really won't listen to somebody like me.
Muriel Kirkpatrick.
My question is for the panelists in general. What is the greatest obstacle to public awareness of the problems that hearing-impaired people face? And the second part of that question is, what is being done in the Coeur d'Alene area right now through SH?
I'll briefly mention the answer to the first one. The greatest problem is dissemination of information. We have an enormously large country with a very mobile population. Trying to get information out to the very large number of individuals and organizations that are concerned with the problem is very difficult. It takes money. And what we're trying to do is, through a national structure and a lot of word of mouth kind of publicity, organize chapters at the local level. One of our best ones is right here in Coeur d'Alene because of the work of John Senta. And he's been very ably assisted by Chuck Heyman. So I'll let them speak for themselves on that subject.
Talking about what we have done, Coeur d'Alene has a Panhandle chapter of SH, about 50 members. If the national figures are right, we should have about 1,700 to 2,000 hearing-impaired people within our region. So we know only a very few of the people who are not only at risk, these are folks who have lost some hearing. We are trying to serve as a nucleus where they can get information, they can get help. We do it by bringing them to our chapter meetings, letting them talk their problems, sharing our experience. We took a quick poll one day at our meeting, and we figured that we had over 1,000 years of hearing aid experience within that small group. And boy, we have been through all of the problems, not all of the answers, but we find all kinds of interesting answers by intercomparing our experiences and our solutions. And we lean on Chuck here a great deal to give us the technical side to what we know because of our own disability. So, yes, we have done many things. Phones we'll talk about perhaps later. We have audio loops, which are a group means of help. But more than anything else, it has been helping the individual understand his own loss, his own problems, his own options, and then enlisting their support in bringing others to share with us their answers.
Mr. Neiman, you'd like to respond?
Yes. In response to the first question, the greatest obstacle, I think one of the greatest obstacles we have is people, which really is an inherent human trait. We won't accept the fact that we have a hearing problem. Many people who have hearing problems wait 5 to 10 years before anything is ever done about it. Sometimes then it's too late to be effectively helped with a hearing problem. In Coeur d'Alene, we have the SHH chapter, which is very active through Mr. Senta and the members, and they're getting the word out to people that there is help available if they're interested.
Mr. Simpson, I think this would be a good time for us to have a demonstration for our audience of the telephone, because that's one of the great problems I know that you have in communicating in areas all over the country. And you've been kind enough to bring a telephone, which I will give you here. And if you would take this telephone and demonstrate how it can be used to make communication much better.
Let me give just a word of background first. I retired to Coeur d'Alene because I loved everything about the area, but I missed one important point in my research. I didn't try the telephones. I moved to this area and found I was telephone deaf. I could not make a phone call with the then existent general telephone phones. And if you want to feel impotent, want to feel betrayed, try to live where you can't even make an emergency phone call. I get stuck on the road and I have to tap somebody on the shoulder if I can find them. Make a call for me, please. So I started a campaign with GTE to bring the phones that I was used to, because I've always lived in Bell telephone country. And they just automatically provided me with the amplifier telecoil phones that I needed. I didn't know there was a telephone problem. So what turned out to be, or started out to be kind of an adversarial position, is now a totally cooperative position locally. This phone, for example, has a telecoil in it, which is just a little coil of wire inside, and I don't know that you can see it, but this is the little coil here that is not common to general telephone phones. It is common to almost all Bell telephones, not all. Now this little coil, electronically or electromagnetically, couples to a little coil, a matching coil in my hearing aid. So when I want to use this phone, I simply turn my switch to telephone and I can hear. That I hear without all of the surrounding noise, all the distracting stuff that overwhelms what I want to hear, and I can't understand what I need to hear. Now then, if I get a poor connection or a weak connection or a lady with a light voice, then I have this amplifier. And as I need more volume in order to be able to hear, I can simply run this little amplifier up to the point that even I, at a 90 dB loss, which means functionally deaf, I can hear. Rocky, unfortunately, is one cut further. He's just almost off the phone. But for the average person, a phone like this is a miracle. A hearing person uses it just like a regular phone, and then you can take it all the way up to the point that you're deaf, and then there's nothing more that can be done. These are now available to the local people. If you go to the local GTE phone mart, they'll swap this phone for yours free. God bless them. If you need an amplifier, they will provide that, but there's a small monthly charge. But who cares about that if you can hear? So we have tremendous local, regional cooperation. GTE is working on a national program. Fair enough?
Thank you. Lou Reed.
In what ways are we who can hear insensitive to the problems that those who are hard of hearing have? What are some of the thoughtless things that people perhaps overlook that would be helpful to those who do have this silent handicap to have more public awareness of?
I may not have gotten that whole question, I'm sorry, but some of the basic things that you do to help an individual who's hard of hearing?
I think that is the positive way, yes. What are some of the tips that you can give to those who need to communicate with those who have hearing impairments?
Well, there are a lot of basic things like don't stand in front of a lighted window, don't chew gum, don't have too thick a beard.
Mustache.
If you have a hearing impaired person in the family, certainly keep your beard, but trim it to the point where you can see their lips. Most people do have some capability for speech reading. Even if you're a hearing person, you use nonverbal clues. The person who loses his or her hearing obviously relies more heavily on that kind of information. So again, in terms of the psychology of the person addressed, you don't raise your voice. Have you ever looked in the mirror and shouted to see whether or not you can shout gracefully? I don't believe you can. And as soon as you raise the volume of your voice, your facial expression changes. And that nonverbal expression tells me something quicker than what I hear because I don't hear that well.
Does it become aggressive then? Is that what happens? You become more aggressive?
Well, our reactions
when you yell?
are varied depending upon our own particular environment and development of our personalities, but many deaf and hard of hearing people are accused of being overly aggressive. The other extreme the majority of us are considered to be very passive and sheep-like. I think that there is and can be a middle ground on both of those things, so that what we try to do is educate the hearing population on how to address those of us who have the problem. But we have the responsibility to let you know we have the problem. And I think that's where we have been remiss. Instead of denying it, as Chuck says, which is very, very common, we have to somehow break down that stigma and realize that you do love us. We have to make the assumption that you're good people, that you want to help us, and a word of explanation from us will let you do what you would like to do. So by telling you these various rules for behavior in addressing a hearing-impaired person, we can alert you to the problem and facilitate your helping us, I think.
But if I yell at you, my facial expression then will not convey the fact that will not convey love. Is that what you're saying?
Your facial expression will not convey that you're trying to be helpful. And if I'm a shy person, I won't ask you again. I'll retreat. And that withdrawal leads into consequences, which I'm sure our other two panelists have a great deal of information on.
That's
because we go into grieving, which is normal, over the loss of a precious sense. It is not normal to remain deep in depression. It's normal to work through that grief and come out with a new reality of our lives. But if we are constantly pushed aside by virtue of the kind of expressions that we see and the nonverbal messages that we get from those that are closest to us, we retreat and we don't come out of grief. We go into depression. And that's a very serious consequence for our both mental and physical health.
I think that's very helpful for families who have people who are going deaf or who are becoming hard of hearing. John, can you add to that?
I'm going to add just one point, Lou. Don't stand too far away, about 3 feet, because I need to see your lips as well as to hear you. Enunciate clearly. Don't speak more loudly, but speak a little more slowly, perhaps. And remember, when I'm hearing impaired, not only do I have a volume loss, but I have what they call a discrimination loss. That's the ability to understand what I hear. And sometimes it takes a little while to percolate before I put the sounds together and know what you said. So if I'm a little slow in responding sometimes, maybe I'm stupid, but sometimes I'm just putting sounds back together and it takes a little while. So don't be impatient. I'm not really senile, I just look that way sometimes.
It's just a delay. Chuck, can you add to this from your experience?
One of the most important things is to have the patience to let the person get their message through to you, then have the patience to listen to what they're trying to tell you. Sometimes in our environment and in our society, everything is so verbal and so fast that if we can't get an answer immediately and correctly, we become irritated. One of the things that you see people do is turn away and say, as Mr. Stone, one of his favorite sayings is, one of his pet peeves rather, is, never mind. It doesn't matter anyway.
Boy,
because
that's a total turn-off.
We get frustrated, yes, because we can't get the message through, so we give up. We forget how hard they're struggling to get our message, to understand, because none of us like to make a mistake. Verbally, you can't erase it like on the paper. It's out there, and you've made a mistake.
So the frustration level on the part of both parties is something that can be raised.
Rocky had the point on that would be very interesting. Rocky, tell about the interpersonal frustration that you have expressed so well when you can't hear.
Well, I think when a person in a family becomes hearing impaired, it really is a true test of love. It comes right down to how you really feel about each other and what you're willing to do to make sure that that person stays in the mainstream of your life. And when I sit around the table, not being able to hear the children or the guests and so forth, unsolicited, this has developed in my family in a way which gives me great joy. After a few minutes, my son, our son, will turn to us and say, Dad, we've just been discussing such and such, and he summarizes it. Now, I don't need every word. I mean, I've lost my hearing. I have a disability that I have to cope with. I can't inconvenience you to repeat every single word. I simply want the communication. I want the message. I'm satisfied with that summary. 3 minutes or 4 minutes later, Jolie will turn to me and say, Daddy, we've been discussing such and such. 5 minutes later, my wife will turn and say, Rocky, we've just been talking so-and-so. You know, even if I'm attending carefully and don't need that summary, I let them give it to me because it's an act of love. They tell me they respect me and they love me and they want to keep me in their lives. That means so much to me that it gives me the strength to go on even if I'm disappointed or frustrated in some other way. These things, these kind of family support structures, friendships, community support structures are essential to our ability to cope, because we cannot do it alone.
It's beautiful.
David Coyne.
Yes, I'll throw this out to any panel member. When a person finds that they're hard of hearing and they look to hearing aids as a way of overcoming that disability, do you find that hard of hearing people are easy prey to exploitation in the market?
In 1975, Senator Percy conducted an investigation of the hearing aid industry. And they produced two very thick books, replete with documented evidences of abuse, particularly of elderly citizens, by hard sell practices. But generally speaking, hearing aid industry dealers are very much the same the way the rest of us. They're human beings, and in every group you have good and bad. Unfortunately, it only takes a few people to tarnish the image of the hearing aid dealer. That dealer really, in what I call rural America, the small towns of America, is in many cases the only link between a hearing-impaired person and some kind of assistance. So I do not in any way want to be putting down the industry. I do think that the industry has responsibility to clean up its act wherever it has specific evidence that there is abuse. Abuse continues. How much, I don't know. But you will frequently find, let me change that word frequently, you will find occasions where people have been sold a hearing aid and they purchase it simply because they don't have the physical or psychic energy to get rid of the salesperson from their home, not from the shop, from their home. That, I think, is a disgrace and something that we should work toward eradicating. But generally speaking, I think the industry is improving and they're making an effort. As consumers, we can accelerate this improvement by showing them that for the first time we are being organized and we will understand what our rights are, and we will simply demand those rights in a reasonable fashion as we can.
Muriel Kirkpatrick.
On the subject of hearing aids, my understanding is that the cost of hearing aids is not covered by Medicare or Medicaid. Is that correct? And if this is correct, I may be wrong, but if it's correct, I'm wondering about the efficacy so far of lobbying efforts for the hearing impaired, when I think sometimes that, in terms of our income tax at least, the blind have some sway in this area. Am I correct about that?
That's very true. Medicare does not cover the purchase of hearing aids.
Mm-hmm.
Medicaid in different states does, not all states.
I see.
However, that probably won't change until the people with the problem are sufficiently organized to make their influence felt commensurate with their numbers. The blind have succeeded in that. Blind people, excuse me. I'm violating my own admonition not to talk about people in an inanimate way. Blind people have organized themselves, and they are very articulate and powerful in legislative state houses throughout the country, not just the Congress, but states. We are just beginning. The deaf community numbers about 2 million people. The hearing impaired community numbers 17.7 million. The hard of hearing have never really joined with the deaf to organize and lobby on their own behalf. We're beginning to do that, and in the future I think we'll have more clout.
It needs to be done.
Mr. Neiman, you are an expert in the question of audio processes and hearing, and for those people who might face hearing problems in the future, and we might be able to prevent it now, am I correct to assume that there are certain things in society that if you participate in, you increase the chances of having hearing problems later? I'm thinking of the noise pollution again, rock bands, for example. Mm-hmm. Would you clarify for our audience what they may be doing to their hearing?
We're seeing now hearing losses in 16, 17, 18-year-old young people. The same kinds of hearing losses that 10 or 15 years ago we saw in men who had spent 20 to 30 years in industry, in mills and mines, around any flight line, this kind of hearing loss. It's a high-frequency sensory neural hearing loss that has no eradication. It's there. It will not go away. It cannot be helped. It's being caused by a number of things. Dirt bikes is one. Music is another. It doesn't have to be rock music. It could be Brahms and be loud enough, and it'll do the same thing. Anyone doing a lot of shooting without ear protection, chainsaws, that kind of noise, that's what we're talking about. To give you an example, we speak at about 65 to 70 decibel. Now, the Occupational Safety and Health Act states that 85 decibel and above, or above 85 decibel rather, is harmful to your hearing. So if you walked around and shouted all day, close to someone, like with John, you may be causing a problem there. So it doesn't have to be really loud if it's constant.
But we've increased in all those areas
Everything.
the noise pollution. So
Yes.
we're going to see even more people in the future.
We
with this
will.
problem. We're almost out of time, but Mr. Stone, before we leave, I want you to talk a little bit about some of the journals or magazines you brought, and I will show them to the audience. And some of our viewers may be interested in subscribing to these or getting them. Here is one that we have now, if you'll tell us about this one.
This is what I generally try to do with the journal is take something for the cover and attach a theme to it. And this particular journal's theme is going to school with a hearing loss. And as you can see, the little boy is saying, I know I'm somebody because God don't make no junk. Philosophically, that's a very important point for the hearing impaired person to remember. And so we go into that at some depth. This one's on mental health. And you see again, is it any less a rose? We've lost our hearing. We haven't lost our humanness. We don't like being diagnosed as mentally retarded if we're young or senile as we're old. And that's what frequently happens, even in 1983. This one is if a tree falls in the forest, will it make a sound? An ancient question. Inside, you will find a lot of assistive devices that go beyond the hearing aid, which help hearing impaired people in a whole variety of listening situations.
I noticed that one of our former guests is on the back of this, Buckminster Fuller.
Bucky is severely hearing impaired, and I just got a letter from him the other day. He's still going strong, traveling thousands of miles around the world every year. A fantastic man.
I must interrupt. We're out of time, and I want to thank all three of you for being with us. We've enjoyed it very much. You've been very, very informative to our audience, and I know they appreciate it. I also express my appreciation to the panel for outstanding questions. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have been talking with three representatives of the Self-Help for the Hard of Hearing People Incorporated, including their national president. We hope you've enjoyed the program and that you find this as helpful as we have, and that you'll be with us again next week at this very same time. Please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.